Imagine a world in which your students are hooked into your online course, ready for the story you have to tell. That's what we're going to be covering on today's video, the 6 steps to create a narrative structure to your online course. I'm Andrew Barry, I help people teach on the internet, and this is my weekly series on how to do just that. Remember to like and subscribe below to get updated for next videos. Let's dive into story structure. So there are 6 elements to think about when we talk about story structure. And these are hook, signpost, sensitize, elucidate, reinforce, and conclude. Let's start right at the top. So the hook is where you capture attention. It's where you shock, surprise, entertain. At the beginning of this video, I asked you to imagine a world in which the attention of your students is captured and sucked into a story that you have to tell them. Now, hopefully that created a whole bunch of visions and aspirations and dreams in your head about what that might look like for your course. That's an example of a hook. So my good friend Robbie Crabtree has a couple of excellent examples for how to do this. The first is make it a question. I often start my videos with a question. It gets the viewer thinking, and immediately you're there in their world, absorbing what you have to say and applying it to their own framework. And as Robbie says, these can be vague or specific. Questions like, why are you here? What's the purpose? You know that feeling? These are all emotive ways to get people to start to think about how your content applies to them. The next is make it a quote. This is incredibly powerful because people associate quotes with so much more depth and context and meaning than just the words themselves. So you can already convey so much information with just a quote because it's associated with a person, with a time and place, with a concept, with an idea. So think about a really good quote that you can potentially start to hook your students in. Another powerful one from Robbie is a fact or statistic. So it gets people thinking, especially when it's something pretty controversial or counterintuitive or just interesting. Immediately, again, you get those wheels going and your student is thinking, wow, how could this apply to me? What does that mean? I want to find out more. And that's the hook you need to get their attention. The last one from Robbie is make it a story. This is his personal favorite, one of mine too. I start almost all of my essays with a personal story because that's what people want to read, right? People want to know, they want to read something they can relate to. And so in an online course, it's exactly the same. Tell your personal story. Get people bought in to the journey you went through, because that's one of the best ways for you as a teacher to show them that they can trust you to guide them in their journey. So next, we have signposting. Think of signposting as chapters in the structure of your online course. I've talked a little bit about this on the channel, but it's basically the milestones that people will need to cross to be able to complete the journey that you're laying out for them. Signposts should signal where they are, where they've been, and what's coming. Make sure to revisit this signpost early and often throughout your course to remind people of where they are. It's like the chapters in a book. It's often helpful to, as you're in the middle of a book, to look back and try this next time. Actually, the book you're reading now is look back at the table of contents and see kind of the map of where you are and where you've been and where you're going. Gives you a nice bird's eye view of the overall structure of the book and the context in which you are currently in at the place you are in that book. Think about applying that now to your online course. Okay, so next up, we've got sensitizing. And this basically means facilitating a receptive mindset from your students by being consistent. And you can think about this as being consistent throughout your overall brand. So think about the fonts that you use, the colors, the music. Think about a change in music creating a very different vibe. Let's go back to that original track. For me, I have this lion that's always very present in a lot of my videos. This is something that creates a familiar feel, a familiar look for people. I sometimes play around with colors. In today's video, we've got a sort of mauvey purple, but there's often some sort of color going on in the background as well. These are all different things that we can use to create that familiar feeling for students. Right, so now with those things in place, we can move on to the next thing, elucidate. Elucidate is just a fancy word for saying explaining complex concepts. When you're structuring your overall course, I always like to think about taking the why and the what of the course and pre-training that, so people are familiar with the definitions and concepts that you're going to want to cover. In the elucidating, which is often best done live, but doesn't have to be, you explain the how of your course. You show how things relate. You show them in new context so people can start to see the patterns that you have developed over your experience, and they can start to develop their own pattern recognition as they apply the concepts in these new contexts. So this is a great place to bring your experience to the fore as an instructor and use analogies, use stories, use comparisons to show how the concepts you're talking about relate to each other and give people ideas for how they can apply that. Right, now it's time to repeat, 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 over and over again. This is so important in learning. There's a great mathematician and philosopher by the name of Giancarlo Rotta, and he's published an incredible book with lessons from his life as a mathematician and philosopher, and a lot of them are drawing on his experience teaching those subjects, especially mathematics. And one of the things he says is this: every lecture should state one main point and repeat it over and over, like a theme with variations. An audience is like a herd of cows moving slowly in the direction that they're being driven towards. He goes on to say, which is not the most flattering comparison, but he goes on to draw this important analogy. By trying to fit in too much information, he says, the cows will scatter all over the field. The audience will lose interest, and everyone will go back to the thoughts they interrupted in order to come to our lecture. So what you've got to be doing as a course creator is identifying that one idea, that one concept you want them to leave with, and how it maybe relates to things in its world, and focus on that only. And repeat it over and over and over again. This repetition will give people different ways to apply it, different contexts in which to absorb it, and will really help with the transfer of knowledge. Right, and finally, you conclude. What's important here is to try and link everything back to the first hook. So at the beginning of this video, I asked you to imagine that world in which your students' attention is captured and sucked in and drawn into the story that you have to tell them. Now at this point, I'm here to tell you that if you follow these 6 steps, you'll be able to do that too for your online course. And in classic conclusion style, I'm going to quickly summarize those 6 steps for you. So first of all, we create the hook, the story or question or asking someone to imagine or fact or figure or quote that can capture attention. Then we signpost the journey, and we do that early and often so people know exactly where they are, where they've been, and where they're going. Then we sensitize. We use things like fonts, images, colors, and music to create a familiar feeling and develop that receptive mindset in our audience. Then you elucidate. You show how the different concepts that you've introduced fit together. Reinforce that, repeat it over and over again to maximize the chances of fast transfer of knowledge. And finally, conclude, which is what I will do right now. So try these on your next course. Break it down to the lesson level. That's a very good starting point. And then try hit these 6 things and repeat that for every single lesson in your course. Let me know how it goes. Put a comment below. I love to hear from course creators, and I will see you next week.